Bottled and bond whiskey has to be made to some pretty stringent definitions. First of all, it has to be made in a single season at a single distillery. It has to be matured at least 4 years in a bonded warehouse, and it has to be bottled at 50% ABV. Jeff Arnett is here with us, the master distiller for Jack Daniel's, and they've released a bottled and bond whiskey for, I think, the first time, right, Jeff?
You know, at least in our modern history. There may have been some that were produced years ago, maybe prior to Prohibition, but I didn't have any records of any. So to my knowledge, yes, this will be our first time to release a bottled and bond for Jack Daniel's.
So what was your thinking? Why was now the right moment for a bottled and bond?
Well, you know, I think just in general, the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s, these were a heyday period for brown spirits. You know, bourbons and whiskeys all did very well. They were dark, they were oaky, they were high proof, and that's what people adored. And then there was the 80s, 90s, and 2000s where all of those attributes seemed to work against you. People didn't really care for brown spirits, and they didn't like high proofs. And now we're beginning to see that change. I think around 2010 you begin to see this trend backward towards, you know, where brown spirits are now in favor. The people are ordering whiskey cocktails. You know, it's not really the men, it's the women more than anything driving it. But definitely, and when it comes especially to mixologists, you know, they like to work with your product. And I've never heard a bartender say, I want less proof in the bottle. Almost all of them will tell you that they want more proof. And with cocktails in particular, some of the more intricate cocktails really kind of demand a slightly higher starting bottle proof. So I think that's one of the things that really makes bottled and bond relevant, is that, you know, unlike what we've seen probably in the last 30 years, that more and more people are wanting high proof brown spirits. And of course, we're proud to be able to offer one from Jack Daniel's. And if you love Jack Daniel's, then in this bottle there's even more to love, because normally being at 80 proof, when you go to 100 proof, it really makes a statement.
Did you have to change anything about your processes as a distiller to make this particular whiskey?
We do. Of course, we have a couple of different grain bills now, so we have to make sure, of course, that we don't mix grain bills. It needs to be a single distillate from a single distillation season. So normally we wouldn't necessarily have to separate the spring from the fall distillation season. If we were making a batch, that would be irrelevant. For the purposes, as long as the barrels are at least 4 years old, that's sort of the American whiskey standard. It doesn't have to carry an age statement, so that would be sort of a minimum starting point for us. So we would go, you know, from there up. But yeah, so in this particular case, we have to make sure that when we're making the batch, that we're being very select about where it's coming from and when it was distilled, and making sure that we're not crossing over seasons in that. But at the same time, I think also choosing the barrel so that you're getting the right balance of character and flavor, that people, when they taste it, would recognize it as it's distinctly Jack Daniel's, and it has the balance that you're expecting from it.
Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of people think bottled and bond means this is a high quality, really great whiskey. I mean, is that something that you make both bottled and bond and non-bottled and bond whiskeys, and I think you would say they're all great. So
they are for sure. But you know, there's like I said, there's a historical element to this, and years ago, when the Bottled and Bond Act was written, there was just a lot going on. There was whiskey being sold in barrels, and people would when the barrel would get low, they would backfill it with, you know, all kinds of different things. So you just really couldn't trust the quality of what you're being served in that setting. So the Bottled and Bond Act was basically to get it in a bottle and get it sealed with labels on it that you knew who made it, when it was distilled, when it was made, who made it, you know, so that you kind of got certificate of assurance, if you will, in the purchase, where the barreled whiskey that you might walk into a saloon or a store and order from, you couldn't always certify the quality of what you were getting. So this was meant to kind of be an intervention into, you know, some shenanigans, I guess, that were going on out in the marketplace, that the manufacturers wanted to make sure that their reputations weren't tarnished, that they were getting a good, authentic quality good into the hands of the consumer in a sealed fashion.
Mm-hmm. And that was back in 1897.
It was.
Even before there were any regulations about what made a bourbon or a whiskey, right? So this was the first true legal definition for a specific type of whiskey. Well, can we taste the bottled and bond? So
this is one of my favorites. I really like higher proof.
I do too. So for a regular Jack Daniel's drinker who's used to drinking Old No. 7, what is going to be similar and different about this particular bottle?
You know, I would almost describe this Bottled and Bond as being sort of our Old No. 7 Black Label whiskey on steroids. You know, it will be everything that you know and love about our Old No. 7 whiskey that you know from the black and white labeled bottle. it's just going to be all amplified. It's going to have more body, it's going to have more flavor, it's got more nose, more color. You can see all these things kind of being amplified in it. So of course you could turn this, you can put ice in it, you could put water in it, you could turn this back into a black label or something very similar to it, but I think especially with bottled and bond, with any whiskey for that matter, I think the first sip should always be done neat, just to evaluate it. So that's always the good starting point. So
all right, cheers.
Yeah.
Wow, you're right. I mean, it's a very familiar flavor profile, but it is all just lifted up.
Almost silky on the palate, very creamy, but has the sweet vanilla caramel that I think is really the signature of Jack Daniel's, and a balancing level of oak on the exit, but very uniform, very balanced. That's, one of the things that I pride Jack Daniel's in doing is that if you look across our range, I say that we're sweet to oaky. Our Gentleman Jack's pretty sweet. Our single barrels can be pretty oaky. When it comes to Old Number 7, balanced. It's not going to favor the sweet or the oak into the palate, but almost give you an equal portion of each. And like I said, that balance provides, I think, flexibility, versatility when it comes to, if you do want to make cocktails, that balance is going to come in handy, that you don't have to add a lot of sweeteners in it, you don't have to add a lot of bitters, you can just put a drop in and kind of move the needle to make the cocktail. So this is great neat, but more importantly for those people out there who are saying, I want to make a really nice cocktail and I want the whiskey to show up, but I've got a lot of things I'm going to add into it. Bottled bond's great for that.
Yeah, I could definitely see using this in an old-fashioned.
yeah, it's very nice.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff. I appreciate
You're very
you
welcome.
coming in to talk to us about bottled and bond.
Yeah, thank you for your time.
Yeah, cheers.
Cheers.